Hello. Yeah.
Just give it a second.
Hello. And welcome to the pasture cropping webinar presented by the Pasture-Fed Life Association, Pasture-Fed Life Association, and Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, whatever it's called, and Groundswell Agriculture. This very exciting topic. I think that it could be a game changer if we can work out a way of profitably and successfully growing other crops on pasture. And we've tried various things and they haven't worked out brilliantly, but luckily we've got three very good speakers today who hopefully do know what they're doing, and they will tell us all about it. Well, without further ado, I think, well, I'll introduce them each as they come to it. But the first speaker is Andy Howard from Kent, and no one knows more about it than he does. So I'll pass it over to you, Andy.
Thanks, John. I don't know about that at all. Right. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, as John said, I'm a farmer from Kent, but I'm not a livestock farmer. I'm an arable farmer, but I have got a little bit of experience in growing crops on permanent crops, and I did a Nuffield 5-6 years ago where I saw different people trying different things. So I'll quickly, for 15 minutes, try and give you my experiences and my thoughts. I'm certainly not an expert, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but I guess that's why this webinar is here, to seed the conversation to progress this topic forward. So family farm, varied soil type in Kent, reasonable rainfall, just comes at the wrong time of year, small rolling fields surrounded by woods. We do have some permanent pasture that is let out to some to people with sheep. We have a guy with dairy heifers. Even though we don't have livestock of our own, our grass seed, our herbage seed, they take, local dairy farmer takes the silage cut off tomorrow. Every year we graze the herbage seed. Our cover crops are grazed by sheep, and the permanent pasture. So we do have plenty of animals on the farm, but just not my own, which is ideal for me. We grow a large rotation, wide rotation, and it can, as you can see, there's a few intercrops in there, which is what my Nuffield Scholarship was about. Hopefully might give me some insight. So in 2015, 2016, I sort of went around the world, and I went to see 82 different farmers and researchers in all these countries. Very fortunate, and it gives you a real good eye-opening insight into what's going on in the world. Most of it was to do with companion cropping in arable systems, but there was a few that were doing it in livestock systems. One that's not completely the same thing as a pasture, but it's the same principle, and it's something that I know people are trying to do here, and I've tried a few times, is growing a living mulch, is where you grow arable crops on a permanent bed of a legume. This guy in France was doing it on lucerne, so he would establish his lucerne in his oilseed rape, let it sit in the bottom of the oilseed rape, and then after that plant 3 crops, 2 crops of wheat and 1 crop of peas afterwards direct into the lucerne. He was a conventional farmer, so he could use herbicides, but he was getting good results in the center of France doing this. He was managing to halve his nitrogen by growing permanent crops on permanent lucerne, and also he didn't need any fungicides, so there was a real synergy between the lucerne and the wheat, meaning the wheat was a lot healthier. We have tried a few times to grow clover, permanent clover, with our arable crops, and unfortunately, we haven't been very successful yet. We'll keep trying. Another guy in Canada was trying to do a similar thing, and that was in Ontario, and that's in soybeans. And one of the biggest challenges for me with this whole pasture cropping or living mulches is controlling the understory crop while the cash crop is growing. If you are conventional, you can use herbicides. In this situation, where it was soybeans, he couldn't use herbicides with the clover. So what he tried to do on a trial area was he got a lot of lawn mowers, put them in a line, and he was in row mowing between the soybean rows, which is fine for wide rows crops, but for cereal crops on narrow rows, not so practical. But he was trying to keep that understory down while the cash crop grows, which for me is one of the key things that we haven't quite got on top of yet. And on my travels, one place I didn't go to was Australia, and that's where the home of pasture cropping is. I thought it was a bit of a long way to go and see Colin Size in New South Wales. It's about the only person in Australia I wanted to see. But anyone who knows anything about this is that they grow oats or forage direct into their permanent pasture. But remember that their permanent pasture is a native pasture which is slow growing, and also they plant the cash crops when that pasture goes dormant. And I think that's two things we need to take from the other side of the world to this side of the world. We need to make sure we're not trying to grow these pasture crops into a sort of fast growing hybrid ryegrass, and don't try and do it when the ryegrass is trying to grow as well. Two key things to help this work. Many of you may know the guy on the right here. This is the only pasture cropped kind of field I went to on my travels, and this is Gabe Brown in North Dakota. And what he'd done, he'd taken on a new farm, which was had a lot of old 12-year-old alfalfa lucerne ground on it, and it was tired, and all his neighbours told him that he should be ripping it up and putting a new lay in. But what he did was he went in with some rye and some vetch, and he slot seeded the rye and vetch into his lucerne. And what he found is that not only did he get a massive improvement in his silage yield from the rye and the lucerne, he also found that the lucerne underneath got rejuvenated. I'll show you that again at the end as well on someone in the UK. The fact that you're putting an annual into a perennial can actually reinvigorate that perennial. Sorry, give me a second. Someone's playing the piano next door. Just had to stop them. So from my Nuffield, my two points I took home from a Nuffield is to have a perennial growing in our system, and we have done that, and to integrate livestock where possible to speed up soil improvement. And that was the key points that most people I went to see would say always have roots growing. Which is what happens when you have pasture, and it doesn't happen when you have annual crops. So experience from home. 5 years ago, I planted spring barley direct into a 5-year lay. We did kill it off. We weren't planning to keep the lay, but I put this in just to highlight a few points. The barley came up fine. It started growing away fine, and then about, I don't know, middle of May, June, it just stopped growing, went all yellow and horrible, and didn't yield very well, which for me highlights a challenge of growing into pasture, of nitrogen lockup, pests, and even the pasture is dying, it can still hold back your crop. And the main thing for me is it's a cereal going into a grass, so it's the same family. So what we do now when we're planting into grass is we plant beans. And this is this year. This is after our grass seed. And we've planted direct spring beans. And the spring beans can take a bit of pest damage. They can take the They can take the wireworm, they can take the leather jackets. They're not worried about the nitrogen lockup. Big seed, they're not really worried about the allelopathy from the grass, and it's something that can be successful. And we haven't found another crop yet that's quite so successful as beans when we're coming out of grass. Again, we're not keeping the grass growing, but I think it's the principles are the same when you're going into grass as the same as when it's coming out of grass, or things to think about and look out for. This is the only time I've done some proper pasture cropping, and it wasn't on my farm. I don't know whether David Cornforth in East Sussex a couple of years ago, he rang me up saying he wanted me to plant a annual forage crop into his grass. He had some tired permanent pasture, and he wanted to try and get some extra forage off it before he reseeded it. So I went down there about this time of year, I think it might mid-May maybe. And when I turned up in the field, he had his cows grazing the grass, which again, I think is another key thing for anyone trying to do this, is to make sure that the grazing is grazed tight before you plant the crop. I mean, they were literally in the field when I drove in, and he grazed it afterwards as well to try and keep that grass down. And he put in the mix you can see on your screen. Again, you can see there's quite a lot of apart from the ryegrass and the black oats, there's a lot of non-grass species, which will probably be fine going direct into grass. And he rang me up in about September. 2 years ago in September, it was very dry like it normally is in the southeast. A lot of the grass fields have gone brown. He said, Andy, that field is the only one that's green in the area. And this is him grazing his young stock in September with reasonable growth, mob grazing it when a lot of the grass fields around in the area were brown, which shows it is possible. But for me, the key is that he was putting some fast growing legumes and sort of warm season crops in that mix, which are different growth habits and different grow at different times of year compared to the grass. I guess the grass was starting to go dormant sort of June, July, August when we get the drought in the area, which is one reason why I think it worked. And he did say as well that it did rejuvenate the grass once he'd done this. And I don't think he did have to reseed the grass afterwards, which is good saving. So that was a quick run through, and I just thought I'd put down some final thoughts, conclusions of my thoughts on pasture cropping. For me, the pasture you're planting into needs to be a diverse pasture. So if you're trying to do it into a silage lay of hybrid Italian ryegrass, I don't think you'll succeed. It'll be too competitive. I've tried it with oats and it didn't work. So sort of your herbal lay type of thing would probably be a lot better for doing this into. Diversity always wins. Plant your annual crop when the pasture growth is lower. So normally in this country, I suppose it's sort of late summer, mid to late summer, September, and that'll give your cash crop a chance to get away before the pasture starts growing underneath. Use species that are different to the pasture. So if there's a lot of grass in there, use legumes, brassicas, chenopods. I'd keep the amount of species of similar species like cereals lower. Someone else might say something different. But if you are going to use something of the similar species, make sure they're tall growing varieties. I guess that your ryes, your ancient grains probably do a similar thing, that shade the pasture underneath. A short winter wheat, modern winter wheat probably wouldn't do the job at all. And control the pasture between the rows. And I haven't seen anyone yet who's managed to do this mechanically yet. As I say, you can do it with herbicides, but mechanically, I think we need to do some developing to get this to work properly. Otherwise, I think you'll get a dry time like now, and I think the pasture will just suck all the moisture away from the cash crop. For me, consider a low dose of a herbicide just before or just after you kill the pasture if you're not organic, and that will, you can suppress the pasture but not kill it, and depends on what system you're on. But for me, that's what I've learned, a quick run through and my thoughts on how to give yourself the best chance of achieving success with this. And I'll leave it to the other two experts, the other two Andys, who probably have a bit more experience of doing it on farm. That's me, John.
Many thanks, Andy. That's completely brilliant. Yeah, a lot to think of. The whole, I think it's so interesting the way that you just everything grows so much better if it's not in a monoculture. And it's what you're saying about that cover out in a very dry summer, the multi-species cover growing so much better. Yeah, and I urge anyone who hasn't read it to read your Nuffield report. Completely brilliant. I had to read it 3 times to just it's so full of interesting stuff.
Which it's free as well.
It's free as well. And what can you say about that apart from this seminar?
Farmers love free stuff.
It's very very interesting, very thought-provoking about the future of agriculture. I think there's so much good stuff in there. And I was meant to say at the beginning, if you've got any questions, if you can stick them up in the Q&A slot, and then we'll come to them at the end.
Leave it till the end, do you?
I think, well, there are 1 or 2. I mean, yeah, someone asked about glyphosate. It'll come up again if you want to answer that.
Well, it's the only thing that I know that does a cheapest job of killing off a lay. That's normally what we use. But you can also use it at a low rate to not kill it off, but suppress it. So I guess the other options is your plough or your cultivate it a few times to kill it off. Depends if you want to kill it off. But we do, and in our situation we do, because it's grass seed that we're coming out of, not a pasture.
Yeah. We would just, I mean, we did the opposite of you, and behind our herbal lay, we sprayed the grass off August time and left clovers and things coming through and planted wheat into that a month or 2 later, and it's looking fantastic now. But it's again, glyphosate was a weapon of choice. It just yeah, well, I think we'll take most of the Q questions at the end, Andy, if that's right, if you're happy to hang around. If we move on to Andy Cato now, who has got a very exciting story to tell. I won't preempt it. You, Andy, it's all yours. Tell us all about it.
Okay, well, I'm going to attempt to screen share, see if this works. There should be a picture of a greenhouse if all was gone to plan. Has that worked?
Yeah, nearly.
Yeah. Oh, about half a picture of a greenhouse at least. Anyway, that'll do. Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so obviously slightly apprehensive of former musicians speaking between 2 Nuffield scholars and in front of the founder of Groundswell, but I'll give it my best shot. And yeah, so I come from outside the farming world. Just a little bit of background, just so you to understand where I'm coming at this question from, because it's a bit of a specific angle. So I got into farming about 15 years ago through reading articles about the consequences of a lot of food production techniques. This led to a market garden. Then it led to cashing in my songwriting credits to buy a farm in France, at which point things went horribly wrong. It was 0.5% organic matter after 80 years of maize cultivation. I tried just going straight into organic arable farming. I tried some things like this, for example, is a Garford guided hoe, which was quite revolutionary down here at the time. So sort of band sowing of cereals and inter-row hoeing of cereals, various other experiments along those lines. But basically, I realized that I was losing what little fertility remained in my soil preparation. I was making the fundamental problem worse. With the benefit of hindsight, I should have bought some herbal lay seeds, some electric fence, some livestock, and forgot about crops for a few years. But I was in a situation where the fields were full of docks and thistles and other perennial annual weeds. I was under enormous financial pressure, and the organic sort of standard organic agriculture, if you like, cultivation-based organic agriculture, just wasn't stacking up. And just at the point where I kind of was about to give up, I came across Albert Howard and I came across the Rodale Institute, and that led to two things. One was putting in place some herbal lays and getting some livestock, some red Sussex in my case. And on the other hand, trying to mimic the Rodale Institute's experiments with crimper, the crimper roller. This was a herbal lay mix inspired by Newman Turner's fertility farming thing, which actually Cotswold Seeds handily provided and still do, I think, pretty much as it was. And on the other, with the herbal lays and the cows, I wanted to do the mob grazing thing. So we put in place these sort of cow corridors initially, actually, because there's no shade on the farm. Those trees are about the only ones that are left. But what that's actually meant is that the cows circulate freely down these cow corridors whenever they want drink or water or shade. And all we have to do is just lift up the wire into the daily, or sometimes we divide the daily pasture into 2 or 3. But it's actually been a huge labour saving, because they just they follow the corridors as they like until they get to the bit where the wire's up and they go into the daily pasture. And it's nice. It gives them a lot of autonomy, and inadvertently saved us a lot of work. So that led to the ability to sort of graze any area of the farm quite easily. And the speed of kind of restoration into these horribly degraded soils with the combination of the herbal lay and the mob grazing was encouraging and spectacular, actually. And on the other hand, well, that's just replanting of some of the hedgerows. We put in place these crimperola experiments. So this was a cover crop of vetch that was rolled down, and we planted maize through the vetch. And you can see there on the bottom right, actually not a great comment on the biological activity of my soil, that the rolled vetch lasted so long, but nevertheless it worked as a system, and was demonstrably more successful than the control that I did with standard bare earth cultivations. And I did the same thing, soybeans into rolled rye, just following the Rodale Institute stuff. And I also tried some allelopathic systems. The best one I found was buckwheat. So the top right was the buckwheat residue after harvest, actually, a lot of seed drop. And the bottom right is the buckwheat drilled after after a frost has killed off that's the barley drilled after a frost has killed off the buckwheat seedlings. And on the left is the barley at the end of the cycle. I should say this is an organic farm, so I've been sort of in that system from the beginning. So that was really encouraging. And between all these three things, I started to see a way forward, but I had a problem of wheelings, basically. The land was very susceptible to compaction. And I'll keep this bit brief, it's a bit of a diversion, but the controlled traffic and GPS wasn't on my radar or affordable. And so I went down a different road to be lighter on the land, which was via horses. Just before I move on, this was another approach, which was multi-species stuff. So there's crimson clover, oats, and rye. And so I went down this horse-drawn farming route. That was the Amish in Pennsylvania who taught me how to do it. That's my friend Thierry, with whom we trained up these horses, and we ended up farming with horses, which was very nice and very satisfying, but in retrospect was probably something of a distraction from really concentrating on the agronomy of the situation. This was the GPS on the horse-drawn forecart, because when you're direct drilling, of course, especially with horses, you have no idea where you've been. So that's possibly a world first. But there was one key concept, which is where we come into the pasture cropping or consequence of farming with horses, which is the absence of power. And so here, for example, same thing, a cover crop of vetch, but I didn't have the option of rolling that down and drilling through it with a heavy no-till drill like I'd done before with the maize. So I tried instead broadcasting, in this case, buckwheat into the standing vetch and rolling it afterwards. And the result was that. So not a perfect stand, but not too bad. So the absence of power sometimes was quite handy. And that applied also to the, when faced with these herbal lays, because the cows have been mob grazing the herbal lays. This soil restoration in those lays compared to what was going on in the fields where I had a succession of annual crops was demonstrably better. And I was looking at statistics like this. Again, this is Gabe Brown again, but the Farm 4, of course, being the one with that has pastures. And I just really didn't want to rip up the herbal lays. And whilst I wasn't totally wedded to only ever using horses, the horsepower thing meant that the power required to do so was not immediately available. And so this led to the first thoughts about pasture cropping. And of course, whenever you sort of Google that, you end up, as we just heard, with Collins Ice in Australia, with the important difference that the previous Andy's pointed out, that he's planting his cereals into pastures which are dormant at that time, and we heard the opposite being done in the UK just now. Obviously, with the wheat and cereals I was interested in growing, that's not the case. That's just a slide that I use for the kids at the farm, the difference between perennial and annual crops, and why I wanted to keep the perennial pastures in the ground if I could. And so I started in the first instance using a very lightweight Aitchison grass farmer drill that we adapted for the horses, and just trying a series of land races direct into pasture and seeing what happened. And out of all the various land races I had on the go, it was interesting that the local one was demonstrably more competitive. Don't know why that is, but it was. But often it would look kind of promising, but you'd end up like that, or like that, or like that, just overrun with the spring run of growth. The real breakthrough came with really aggressive grazing. So this is late winter grazing, taking everything right back, and then doing it again just before growth stage 31, 32, the last possible moment basically before the wheat's going to go. And doing with that really aggressive grazing, we started to get some results. So there's a sown pasture on the left and an unsown pasture on the right. There were some interesting consequences. Again, I can't tell you why, but in this pasture there was still quite a lot of wild oats. But from where the wheat was sown, there were no wild oats. So there's some symbiotic relationship going on there between what the soil needs and what grows. That's quite interesting, but nothing more than an observation. This is an example of what it kind of looks like underneath the wheat canopy, where I left too much of a space between the two seed drill passages. So it started to be really quite promising, and it allowed us to grow the wheat like this for what developed into a farm bakery. But in terms of sort of large scale cereal production applications, it had three main problems. One was lodging, because if you get any lodging in those conditions, you've had it. The second one was if weather prevented the required grazing. And the third one, a bit more fundamental, was that in my heavily degraded, very, very heavy clay soil, it was slowly improving, but in my need to sort of sow early to make the most of the sort of late summer dormant period of the pasture, I often just couldn't get into the ground if it was dry, or if I did, there just wasn't sufficient rooting of the seed. You just couldn't get down into the clay, and that led to me moving away from the horses and trying different time-based drills like the Missouri. I was going for the tines rather than the discs because I'd realized, actually John Pawsey's got a better phrase than I had, which is called controlled mineralization. Basically, in an organic system, if you're building up fertility in the ley, you need to cash in a bit of that for the cereal, which is why I was staying off the disc drills and wanted a bit more disturbance than that to give myself a fighting chance. But again, the problem was that as soon as tine started moving around, I was creating clods that were just not giving me the seed bed that I needed. And this ultimately led to a powered strip till situation as a way to getting the required seed bed, and which is basically on the front of that is a powered strip till for maize. On the back of it, well, welded onto it in a slightly Heath Robinson fashion is a grain drill. And obviously we're now off cereal spacings, and I also wish deeply at this point that Andy Howard had shown me that photograph of the interrow mower from Ontario. But anyway, so we're off the cereal spacings at this point, and I was wondering to what extent there would be a yield penalty, because here we're planting 2 rows of wheat or 2 rows of cereal on strips that are centered at 75 centimeters. It's classic maize spacings. I found some cereal trials in the US where they compared twin rows of wheat 17 centimeters apart with a 41 centimeter interrow, and they compared that with 12.5 centimeter cereal spacings, and the dual row wider spacings had come off favorably. And I also found a monosem trial where they'd sown wheat with their twin row maize planter, which is exactly the same spacings as on this prototype we're working on, 75 centimeter centers, and there it's conventional. Obviously they're fertilizing, but they're getting 7.3 tons a hectare there. So that kind of made me think that we could probably, whilst there'd be a yield penalty, it's probably one we could live with, given that we're sort of adding value to the grain. But crucially, as we've now seen, the interrow mower was required, and so there was various prototypes that went through, all pretty homemade to start with. But since been working with the guys in England, we've got a better version of this going now, and crucially started using it with RTK, which was all new to me. But that has changed the game a bit, and it means that we can do the interrow mowing. This is my friend Matt who's done this little video, but interrow mowing at about 8 or 9 kilometers an hour, which is a bit of a game changer. I'll just let that finish off. So that's the interrow mower in action in the field, and that sort of post late autumn mow. Ideally, the interrow mower would be used for controlling the rows in the latter stages, and the autumn winter mow would be replaced by a graze of everything. This year, for various logistical and weather reasons, that ruled out the winter grazing, and it's been a very hard knock to take. That meant that the rows were controlled, but I just let the cereal go, and that was a mistake, because I've never regretted knocking back these land races really hard in winter and spring, so that, again, I'm talking organically now. There's a real problem with spring nutrition and making sure that the requirements of the plants don't exceed the capacity of the soil biology to provide it. Now, this year has been absolutely brutal in that regard, in that the soil food web has been dormant during an absolutely critical period of growth. So we've gone from there to there. Or in France, we were looking at, the wheat canopy is almost touching, which you can get to this system if you've got a decent bit of fertility. And the photo today was there. There's been the weather over here has been the same. It's no rain at all since the beginning of March. Very, very cold. Just by way of comparison, my neighbour's organic field is looking like that, and those plants are about 25 centimeters high. So we're still sort of comparing favorably, but the thing with this system is that if you start getting tiller dieback, obviously, given the spacings of the wheat, that's not ideal. So this spring nutrition thing is really critical, and I do wonder, given we've seen from the monosem trial, the 7.3 tons per hectare on these spacings, whilst restoring degraded soils via these perennial plants and grazing, and with the increasing extreme weather extremes that we're up against, maybe having some spring fertility options is a judicious compromise. But that's a discussion for another day. In terms of nutrient autonomy, we're just modifying the mower so that on the spring mow, we push the herbal lay or legume-rich herbal lay onto the rows as a kind of mulch, basically, to try and maximize the nitrogen recycling that's happening there. Obviously, there's clearly some below ground exchange as well, because when soil temperatures permit an active soil food web, you get a very visible kick on from the week post mowing. The point of this photo was just taken in the south of England last week, but ultimately I think soil health is the insurance against weather extremes, and constant reminder is looking either side of the hedge. So at the top is the track verge where it's never been messed about with, and at the bottom is the about 6 feet away where the land has been cultivated, crop for hay, and so on. So as always in farming, our system is a work in progress. We're updating the strip till and drilling equipment to work at 6 meters, and the mowers to operate at 6 meters too. I'm not sure if you can really call this pasture cropping. It's cereal strips within a permanent pasture. The pasture being the companion crop, sort of giving the diversity and perennial ecosystem benefits, if you like. I was just keen to create a system that was a very simple way of incorporating diversity and perennial plants. And just as a last word, in France, I was obliged to start milling, start making bread, set up a farm shop, bakery, all the rest of it to add value once you started pursuing kind of quality crops rather than quantity, if you like. And whilst trying to kind of push things on in the field, that's really, really hard work. And so that's what's led to this Wildfarmed Grain project in the UK, which is a way to give farmers who are embarked on these type of techniques and are trying to push these things and grow crops in a way which favours soil health, just to give them a really good price for their crops. So we're doing this kind of consumer facing communication and creating a product which allows food buyers to participate directly in people who are trying to find ways to push things on. So if anyone is interested in getting information about that or growing for us, then please get in touch.
Brilliant. Many thanks. Yeah, I think it's, as you say, it's a work in progress. It's very exciting to see someone having a go. We've got a tiny little trial plot in the Groundswell car park, which is a slightly poor meadow, but we direct drilled some John Letz's heritage wheat into just a little bit just to see what happens. And I was nervous about grazing it. The cattle were in there last week, just because everything is so, like you, is cold and dry, and I didn't think it would put up with being munched. It's not a very healthy colour. So we fenced it off. But anyway, so careful where you park your car if you come to Groundswell. You might land on our trial plot. But very, very good and very exciting. And there are questions coming through, but as I said, I think we'll take them at the end. And if we can move on to Andrew Brewster, the from Scotland, Andrew and his brother are doing very exciting things on up in the frozen north, and I'm very very excited to hear about what you're doing. Andrew, over to you.
Great, thank you, John. Hello, everyone. So as you heard, I'm up in Angus, up in Scotland, with farming partnership with my brother Robert and my mum Jane. And our farm's been organic for 30 years, and we've always sort of been kind of associated with the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, even though we don't sell any produce through them. But this is basically our main enterprise. It's sheep and cattle. The farm is it's about 900 acres, and we're really into mob grazing. So we try and mob graze the cows, move them every day, 365 days of the year if possible. And then the sheep are more on a loose, give them the rougher ground and move them every week. So then we got into pasture cropping just as a bit of fun, really. But then I got inspired by looking at Bruce Maynard. So he's in Australia. So you hear a lot about Colin Seiss. Well, Bruce Maynard's maybe a bit less well known, but he's in some pretty interesting stuff with his technique called no-kill cropping. That's what he calls it, but it's sort of similar idea behind pasture cropping. But it's really about incorporating a grass, just sort of incorporating a grain crop without disturbing what's already there. So that's kind of what we've tried to stick to, and we've drilled in the spring, the summer, and the autumn time, which I'll tell you about in a second. But first, I want to talk about the Dust Bowl in America. I'm sure you all know what it is and what an absolute ecological disaster it was. But this is what the Dust Bowl in Scotland like every springtime. So this is kind of from all the arable farms, must be tens of miles blown across the Strathmore Valley where we are. So this is the picture on the left is a view from my garden, and on the right is what it's like driving through it. So it's terrible. And this is same idea, but this is a picture from last year. This is a picture from last year as well. So it's an annual occurrence. So it's kind of, we've got great potential to move away from cultivating soils and actually try some sort of pasture cropping of some sort, whether it's direct drilling into legumes or something like that, and really get back to carbon in the soil. So this is what we did. We just bought we actually got a contractor in the first year to trial drilling in Forage Rye, and that was reasonably successful. So then we decided to just buy our own drill. So we went for a Moore Unidrill. So it's a disc drill. So it's basically just opening a slot in the ground, dropping a seed in, and then there's a wheel behind that closes the slot up. And the reason we went for a disc drill and not a time drill is because we didn't want to be pulling up stones, and we probably, just with our soils, we probably go through a lot of shear bolts and things like that. So that's why we went for the Moore Unidrill. And then the photo on the top left, you'll see I've got a bale of straw on the front, and that's because our tractors are slightly too small. So we've got a bale of oats on the front of the tractor to help get a bit more grip and help power the drill through. So that's a must if you're into pasture cropping, is you need to have a bale of straw on the front of your tractor. Yeah. So this is this field here was bale grazed by cattle. So we have obviously just strip grazing. Most of you guys in the PFLA know what bale grazing is, but we're just strip grazing the cows through it over the winter time and peeling the bales, and away we go. But bale grazing in the winter time, it does poach up the fields quite a lot, and it does sort of cause a lot of bare patches in the soil. So this is going for a spring crop of oats. Direct drilled as soon as possible after the cattle are taken out, and then you can see it did establish really well, but then this must be a couple of weeks, and then you can see the grass is starting to creep in, and it does sort of get smothered out a bit. So this field, what we did was we just stripped, like mob grazed it in the summertime with finishing cattle, so they actually perform really well on it. And then it's a mixture of grass and oats. And then the good thing is with pasture cropping is if it's a total disaster, there's always grass there to graze. So it's not like we've not sprayed off anything because we're organic. We're not using any chemicals. We're just literally trying to slot in a seed into the ground. This is some spring oats we did that was really successful. This is our reasonably successful. I don't want to big myself up, but this is taken from the Soil Association website, YouTube video that they did with us. So to get access to that video, you go to Soil Association Scotland on YouTube, and you should be able to find the pasture cropping video. So you can sort of see the oats is looking really well. So we ended up whole cropping this field, and it does add a lot of bulk to it does add a lot of volume to the a lot of yield to the silage bill. So it does sort of, if it is successful, it does pay dividends to do that. There's just some more pictures of the oats. And then I've tried sort of tapping into So what I tend to do is I drill with oats, and then I try to add in brassica or sunflowers or something a bit different to see what establishes. But certainly the oats works well, but the brassicas, sometimes it's a hit, but most of the time it's a miss. It's a bit of a waste of money, but it is interesting to trial that. And then here we've got vetch on the right, which does work really well with the oats. But I think that sort of Gabe Brown, he talks about that is kind of 80% forage rye, 20% vetch. Works really well. So that's the same field as where I was standing in. So we silaged that field, so that's in these bales here. And then when we silaged the bales, we left the bales out in a row to allow us to drill down the row. So you see the oats growing up. So I would say this is during the summertime, so it did add a lot of biomass to above the grass, so it was an interesting trial, and I think it did work. So that's the same picture, sort of more in the autumn time. So then we could strip graze that with a standing crop of oats and whole crop oats in the bales. And then sort of the most exciting part of this for me is the autumn sown rye, is because it's not competing with the grass, as you've heard already. It's not competing with the grass during the growing season. If we sow in the autumn time, we can get established, and then it sort of takes over during the winter time. But then it's been a bit later this year, but certainly I feel in March, May time, it just absolutely rockets and gets well ahead of the grass. So I think that's kind of where pasture cropping, for it to be successful, is what we'll focus on more, is focusing on the autumn sown crops and not necessarily the spring and the summer as much. So it can outcompete the grass. So we grazed this on the 4th of April, and then this is what it looks like today in the 3rd of May. So we've never actually grazed the rye before. Previous years we've just left it to go to basically just grow fully mature, and then we decide once it's fully mature, do we either whole crop it or graze it. So for us, if we could graze forage rye in the sort of July time with cows and calves, then we'd get a really good carrying capacity on that area and allow the rest of the farm to basically just grow up. And because the grass can be really lush, it just fires through cows. So if we could graze them on rye for a month even, then that would allow the sort of the rumen and the cow's diet to be far more balanced if we're grazing grass that is way more mature. So that's the forage rye when it is successful. So this was the first year we tried forage rye, so that was 3 years ago, and then it worked really well. So that's prompted us to keep going, but it doesn't work as well that every year. So I think it's to get it established properly, it's down to the weather conditions at the time. So if we get a dry autumn and we can drill straight into the grass, then that makes all the difference. Where last year it was really wet when we were drilling, it was just it was fair disasters. This was 3 years ago when it was really dry, and we managed to drill in really successfully, and that was us away. But that's really all my input about pasture cropping. So I hope that was useful, and I would just encourage you to, if you want to try it, just go for it yourself, because it's very much there's not very much information out there about it, but it's very exciting, the potential for it in the future. So there's just 2 YouTube links. There's Bruce Maynard and our pasture cropping video, which is on the Soil Association website. So I hope that was useful. Thanks. Back to you, John.
Very useful, Andrew. Many, many thanks. Before we get on to actual questions from actual people, the Pasture for Life, the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, the rules and regulations, they're not keen on any kind of cereal, any kind of grain in the diet, are they? What have you got to be a bit careful when you harvest it or eat it, your rye?
Yeah, well, we're not actually certified by the PFLA, so that's not a problem for us. But
Right.
that's definitely right. Is they can't. It's a certain growth stage where it can't go to seed where you graze it. I think so. That is that's a good point.
But I mean, they do, yeah. But apart from that, they do very nicely on it. And we grazed some oats once, growing oats, but by the time they finished, the oats are in full seed, and you could see the bloom on the cattle. It's fantastic. Very, very good, very interesting, and I think yeah, we're a bit soft down here, and if you guys can get all that done up in Angus, you're showing us how it's done. I'm very impressed. Right, hang on now. My glamorous assistant is getting the questions out. One of the questions I'm quite interested to know the answer to is John Letts was asking what yield you reckon you can get, Andy, in per hectare or acre. Do you get in your crop over in France, Andy?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're a bit cutting out a bit. Yeah, well, down here, there's a sort of standard organic. I'm just putting this in context because the potential of the soils down here is not great. So an organic wheat yield down this way would be around about the 2 tons a hectare mark, and and I get between 1.5 and 1.8, so a bit under. But sorry, I'm in hectares rather than acres, and it's just it's a continental thing.
And yeah, I mean, presumably it's got such a great story behind it. It's worth rather more than commodity, community, whatever it's called, commodity wheat. So
I think this is it's a really crucial thing is on wedded to these kind of attempts at trying to grow things differently and in a way which is sort of carbon positive and ecosystem positive, is the need to be rewarded for it. And that's why my colleagues in this wild farm thing, that's the whole plan, is to just not make it so that not everyone's got to set up a bakery basically who wants to try this stuff, and just make the break-even point a bit lower and just take some of the risk out of it.
Yeah. So someone else is asking, who's it, Lupo, strip till or direct drilling, what's better for establishment? I think everyone's kind of answered that question, haven't they? It's in their own ways. Anyone want to join in? No?
The first year when we were trying to establish rye, we that plot where I was standing, the rye was sort of like 5 feet tall. Is half of it was 4 hectares, and 2 hectares were slightly cultivated with I think it was a Vaderstad cross carrier. Would that be right, John? The name of it, the sort of wee cultivator, and then that was just all. It was all contractors. So 2 hectares were direct drilled with just a John Deere 758, and then the other 2 hectares was his Vaderstad cross carrier, light cultivation, then drilled in with the John Deere. And then the bit that was slightly cultivated was certainly far better. But then when I was drilling in that field 2 years later, the part that wasn't cultivated was actually far more better yield than the part that was. So I sort of wonder if you get at the start you think you're getting a return from cultivation, but then maybe over long term you actually don't.
It's,
But I'm no expert. I'm just a cattleman, so don't ask me these things.
it's a long game, though, isn't it? It's a long game. What was that next question? Sorry, we had a. No, we had that one. Andy Howard, do you use preems on the beans drilled into grass, or do you rely on the dead grass to suppress the weeds?
Depends on the field. Been so dry the last 3 years, it's probably been a waste of time with preems. Normally we don't use preems. But then, yeah, depends on the weather.
Yeah, I mean, we've grown beans. They can be horribly dirty and difficult to keep clean, but it's, yeah, you've got to be brave, I think, but just seeing how some of these things go. Can pasture cropping save maize? I think maize is too fussy, isn't it? It's not gonna work in. I don't think it'll work for maize.
I think it can. It could do with the strip tilling, and if you can find a way to control the grass or the pasture in the row for the first 6 weeks, I think maize should work fine. But it is that maize. It's the first 6 weeks. It needs no competition, so you really have got to find a way of controlling everything else in that first 6 weeks. But also, there's a guy in the States who's growing maize on 1.5 meter rows, so double the normal in the States. And he's grazing in between. You can graze in between that. So actually, maize, there is possibly opportunities. You think differently to do it. Having that extra wide row, you get just as much cob, but it gives you more opportunity to drive up there with a tractor or with a sheep or whatever. How you stop them from grazing the maize to start with, I don't know, but I think it can work. It just needs some thought.
Yes. Yeah, it's got to move it a bit. And someone's asking, how can these different practices, be shared and coordinated effectively to get a best practice more quickly for more farmers? And the PFLA have come up and say, join the PFLA, because they've got a fantastic forum where this kind of thing is discussed. So I would recommend you do that. But has anyone else got any ideas about how to encourage this kind of experimentation? I mean, there's an awful lot of it going on. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on in farming at the moment. But
for me, I think it's everyone trying a little bit and sharing it.
Yeah.
Don't be scared to try a hectare here, there, and everywhere. Try different things and then share that information.
Where's the best place to share it, Andy?
At Groundswell, obviously, John.
Oh, 5 is in the post. Yeah. More questions. As a veg grower, Peter Thompson asked, we've introduced cover crops and lays currently silaged or destroyed before the next crop, with livestock moving in next year to try and create a sustainable soil culture. Have you come across anyone trying veg into pasture? I haven't. No?
No.
Oh, well, it didn't take long to sort that one out. We're trying no-till potatoes again, but it's that's slightly different. Could pasture cropping work with dairy cattle? Don't see why not.
Yeah, I think it'd fit really well, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You'd actually be able to see, if it's worthwhile to do as well, just for the milk yield or grass.
Well, Well, you get an instant response, don't you? You know how good it is
Yeah.
for milk. And Andrew, one or two people are saying you're presumably benefiting quite a lot from your neighbours losing all their soil. They'll be landing on yours.
Yeah, don't tell them that though.
What is your soil type up there?
We're not heavy. We're quite light, lighter ground. So, but it's mixed because we go up to Heather Hill. So, sometimes it's sort of marshy ground because of all the rain we're having. So we've had a third of our annual rainfall so far. We had it at the start of February, March time. So it's really wet. And then it's gone dry again. So that's why all this dust is blowing.
Yeah.
So not good.
In terms of soil testing, what does everybody look for? And do you measure the soil biology?
No, we've not really done anything like that. We're quite laid back about these sort of things.
Counting worms? No.
I think we started using that Sector Mentor app by the Farmerama people, which is quite nice. Very simple test that you can do yourselves, and you just lock in some GPS locations on your phone, and they're quite easy to follow instructions. So I think that's definitely worth downloading as a start. And I've also this year started doing SAP analysis for the first time, which is really interesting. A bit of a sort of real-time nutritional readout. But I was reading that book, that John Kemp's book, the other day, and there's a woman in there called Chris Nichols, an American soil scientist lady, and I enjoyed her quote. She said 10 years ago, I'm paraphrasing, but 10 years ago, she thought that she understood about 1% of what was going on in the soil. And after 10 years of research, she thinks she understands 1/10 of 1% of what's going on in the soil.
It is, yeah. The Sector Mentor app is fantastic. I particularly like the fact you can go to exactly the same spot and look at how things have evolved year on year. You're doing it for yourself. You're not sending it away for some laboratory to come back with all sorts of numbers and figures that don't necessarily mean anything. There's another question from John Letts, and we've got some of his landrace wheat growing here. He's asking where you managed to find yours, Andy, because it's I think these heritage wheats are very exciting things to use, but they're surprisingly hard to get hold of, not least because you're not meant to trade them. I think it seems to be the stuff we're growing for John, we give back to him because it's
yeah, we're trying to speak to a few people about that, because there was that derogation, wasn't it, for the YQ, which then lapsed because of Brexit and all the rest of it. So it's a bit of a minefield, all that. But there are lots of people chipping away at that one about certifying populations and so on. And as John knows, he and I exchanged seed back at the beginning. Also exchanged seed with a guy called Jean-François Berthelot, who's the kind of doing similar things to what John's doing. He's been multiplying up these varieties for 25 years and really sort of approaching it from a kind of botanical perspective. So I also got some, as I mentioned earlier on, from a local paysan boulanger who had his local population. So I tried some of the Åland wheat as well from Denmark, and the shot that you saw earlier on was of an Italian population that we're trying. And so yeah, diversity is strength.
It's very well, I mean they're all, it's worth just growing lots of things together and see what works. And it really someone else asking here, has silvo pasture been experimented with pasture cropping? Probably is the answer. And I don't think any of us lot done it. That's a whole nother story. We won't get into that. Any cereal pest disease problems associated with drilling cereals into pasture? I'd have thought the opposite, but I might be wrong. No?
Yeah, well, my experience is the opposite, yeah. It's obviously tempting fate there.
Yeah. And someone asking about hybrid barley. I think the less kind of hybrid stuff you can get, the better, probably, but I might be wrong. I like the idea of stuff growing taller. I think a lot of the modern wheats and oats and barleys and things are too short to compete properly. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Well, I mean, I sowed some modern varieties when I was doing the phase 1 stuff of direct drilling into the grass with the Aitchison grass farm, and I sowed various modern varieties of various things, and nothing happened. But as Andrew was saying, rye is a good one, I think, and as a starting point, I think that's a good crop to give things a whirl with.
Yeah, good routing. What someone's asking about the nitrogen source for your rye, Andrew, in Scotland.
Yeah, that's maybe why we need to be sowing with vetch at the same time, would you not say?
Sorry, say again.
That's why we probably need to be sowing with like vetch at the same time.
All right.
That's like what Gabe Brown advocates, but I also think we should be sort of kind of planning ahead more and putting dung in the fields that we want a pasture crop into. Because at the moment it's more just like wherever the cows are at that time of year, we're choosing those fields to drill into. So
right.
The other problem we have that I never mentioned actually is like when you have cocksfoot grass, which we're moving all our swards away from ryegrass towards cocksfoot, and it's actually cocksfoot so vigorous and it's really tough that I just don't think pasture cropping would actually work, or what we're doing certainly would work in cocksfoot fields where we're drilling into ryegrass fields where are kind of they don't do anything in the winter time and don't really grow much in the springtime. Don't really do much any other time of year either. So.
Yeah, that's another story. It's yeah, for Andy, could you just repeat the last stage? You would graze winter wheat and how aggressively? We have some in and it's all there. I just think it should be further on. Could a hard graze help? I'd say it's still tillering.
All my experience, although I hesitate to say go for it, but yeah, I would say yes, you know, and there's the most notable one of those was when, again, in the early days of experiments, I had sown some wheat into a field which has had alfalfa in it for 4 or 5 years. And so there was quite a lot of nitrogen kicking around and the wheat had got absolutely covered over by spontaneous appearance of lots of ryegrass to the point where you literally couldn't see it. And so I put the cows in there more than hope and expectation and grazed it all down super hard at the last possible moment. And it was one of the most successful versions of that no disturbance pasture cropping that I had. So I've never regretted hard grazing up until the very last moment it's possible.
Interesting. Yeah, I just yeah, it always seems like a brutal thing to do, but it does help with a bit of tillering and things. Yeah, if you're brave enough. And we've had 1 or 2 questions too, Andy, about what you think the yields would be in the UK if you're hoping to get UK farmers providing your supplying your wilder grain.
Yeah, the honest answer is that I don't know, and you could logically, I think, sort of say, well, here we get about because a conventional farmer down here is going to get about using, all the fertilizer, so he's going to get about 5.5 tons a hectare, which means that we're getting about 40% of a conventional yield. So would that mean that that kind of ratio applies to different soil types? Well, we'll find out. I just don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I think the monosem trial shows that on these very wide unconventional spacings, the limiting factor is nutrient availability rather necessarily than the spacings themselves, if you see what I mean. So that would suggest that if there's soils have high potential, then you could go a long way with it.
Yeah, the danger of them all falling over as well, like you say. It's don't want things lodging, but it's yeah. I mean, I think we had a field last year, and it was a ton an acre was what it did without. This was kind of growing into a clover understory and a load of weeds. A sort of organic no-till trial. So, but if we can do that every year, that's kind of all right if we're paid enough for the ton. Right. Anybody? Where are we? There was another one. Well, we all had enough. You'll. Oh, sorry, my screen zooming about. I think. Oh, yeah, Soil Mentor is the app for soil. Someone's pointed out. Sector Mentor is the sister app for vineyards and stuff. Yeah, Soil Mentor, very useful app. Fantastic, go for it. I think we're kind of going around in circles a bit, and everyone's looking a bit, in need of something to eat or drink. What about? Oh, sorry, more questions keep coming in. Do you take the straw off the field? That must be handy because of the.
No, I never do, because the whole nice thing about this system, I think, is the post-harvest graze, when you get the sort of sugar from the shaded grasses and the carbon from the straw, and it's a real tonic for the soil. And certainly taking off anything from fields like mine at 0.5% organic matter will be madness. And your horse-drawn combine chop the straw? No, it just lays it out, or what happens? No, it just lays it out, but that's, I have to be honest, that's not been used for a couple of years, but yeah, it just lays it out the back. Yeah. Very good. Right. Thank you all very much. I didn't. I think that's completely brilliant, and we'll leave it there. But thank you all, and sorry, I'm just making sure there's no. We can carry on all night without getting any further. And yeah, thank you for the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, and for hosting this with us. And it's a wonderful organisation promoting pasture-fed livestock, as the name suggests. And if you're not a member, I should join up. It's got a fantastic. It's a lovely community, and also us at Groundswell, we're running a show 23rd, 24th of June. Tickets available at the moment, but we'll sell out soon because we can't have too many people because there's something called COVID going on, and we can't have you all cuddling up to each other too close. And it looks like a very exciting show with all sorts of people speaking. And Andy Cato will be there talking more about his stuff, and it's all, yeah, get your tickets from the Groundswell website. And what else am I meant to be saying? No, apparently that's it. So thank you all very much.
and good night.
No,
Thank you.
you.
Yeah.